How are you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys a good show today filled with a lot of good, interesting stories to talk about surrounding the NFL and all the storylines. As you all know, this week is free agency week or the start of the new league year, so there's a lot of stuff coming in around that, and I got a few stories with you guys planned here today. The first one being around Sauce Gardner and Mecole Hardman. A few weeks ago, I talked about Mecole Hardman on the Pivot podcast and his comments, harsh criticism towards the Jets. Now, Sauce Gardner was on the Pivot podcast and he was able to respond. I'll get into that and what he said towards Mecole Hardman. Later on, I have a story on the different rule changes and new league proposals from these teams in the NFL on potential rule changes that they would like to see. I picked out a few from the article I read, so I wanted to bring that to you guys and give you guys my thoughts on them. Then later in the show, I'll talk about Calvin Ridley and his new big deal that he signed with the Tennessee Titans, staying in the AFC North and what that could mean for the Tennessee Titans that have revamped a lot and have made their offense look a lot more different heading into next season as it has compared to in the past. Before I wrap it all up with the last segment on Dak's brother, giving some comments and some praise to the Eagles front office, I'll let you guys know what he said, what it could mean for the Cowboys, and how they look at Dak Prescott, and maybe how he could be right in a sense or not. So stick around for that conversation towards the end. A lot of good topics to talk about today. And before I get into the first one, as always, I want to remind you guys, if you have any comments, any questions during the live show on any of the topic segments, to please use the tip and donations link running across the bottom of the screen. The link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. As always, if you have any questions, use that link. It makes it easier for me to read them out while I'm on the air. It makes it more of a conversation, discussion type of show. I think that's more fun in my opinion. And on top of that, it's a big help if you're able to use that link and donate, not only for this show, but for all the shows across the network. And it's greatly appreciated from all of us here at GSMC if you guys are able to do that. And on top of that, always just remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. I personally greatly appreciate that. But in saying that, I can move on to the first topic, the chip shot story. Talking about Sauce Gardner and Mecole Hardman. That sort of back and forth, if you want to call it, between Hardman, who started this whole topic of conversation back when he was on the Pivot podcast with Ryan Clark, Fred Taylor, Channing Crowder. And, they interviewed him about the Super Bowl and all that stuff that went into it the whole season. And he had some interesting comments to say about the Jets because he was originally on the Jets there to start last season. Then he got traded back to the Kansas City Chiefs. And, I don't have the quotes I used back then in front of me, but he basically said that it was on offense, it wasn't really organized with their offense. It was mostly, they didn't have a plan or they didn't know what to do. It was all Aaron Rodgers' show. He was going to try and figure it out for them, essentially. And on top of that, he had issues with him not playing. The Jets trying to play an undrafted rookie ahead of him. He didn't like that. Or the idea that, they were trying to tell him about how to win or what was best for a team. And he went on to say, they can't really do that, or their argument doesn't validate because he's been on Super Bowl winning teams. Him saying they're not going to tell me about how to win. So all of that kind of stemmed from there. Now recently, on the latest edition of the Pivot podcast, Sauce Gardner went on there. They interviewed him, and this topic was brought up as well. And he addressed it pretty directly in the interview with the guys there. And one of the first things he mentioned was that Hardman was basically ungrateful for his time with the Jets. It might not have seen or appeared as how Mecole Hardman put it in his words. And some of the quotes that he said were, if you really know what it takes to win, you're going to make sure you let the team know the reason he couldn't do it is because he never earned his stripes. He came to the facility and thought he had it made for him. That's one thing he said. Later on in the show, he kept on going and said, if you know what it takes to win, you're not going to go into practice and drop hella punts and then have excuses as to why you're dropping them. You're not going to go into a special teams meeting and get cussed out by the special teams coordinator. Giving us a little bit more of an insight than Mecole Hardman did, in all honesty, about what was going on behind the scenes and why that situation kind of fell out. You know, when it was announced that Mecole Hardman was signing with the Jets last year, I thought that was going to be great for them. They signed Allen Lazard. They were adding Mecole Hardman to Garrett Wilson, and I thought, you got your deep threat with Mecole Hardman. You got your number one all-around wide receiver with Garrett Wilson, and Allen Lazard is there as more of a slot, reliable target, familiar with Aaron Rodgers. And the whole talk of last offseason, it seemed like it was all around Aaron Rodgers, the Jets, and Nathaniel Hackett going back to the Jets. It has to be Aaron Rodgers, who their quarterback is going to be. It turned out that people were right. It was going to be Aaron Rodgers. And everyone was painting this New York Jets team ready to contend for a Super Bowl. You know, their defense was young and very exciting with some of the pieces that they had. So how could they not be ready to compete in a division with the Bills that was obviously going to be their toughest competition, but the Patriots weren't looking so hot. The Dolphins weren't really what they are right now. And then you have them on top of that. And, you know, everyone gave them a good chance to fight for the division, maybe even be a Super Bowl contender. But you have the Aaron Rodgers injury, then everything just really is just destroyed after that. Once Aaron Rodgers goes down, there's a lot of bad performances leading to outbreaks with Mecole Hardman and stuff like that. All the frustration boils over, and then Mecole Hardman leaves. You get all the quotes around it, and then now you kind of have both sides of the story, with Mecole Hardman defending himself and his decision, and Sauce Gardner defending the Jets and really standing up for the team. And another sentiment Sauce Gardner applied to this whole situation was that he felt that it was just basically unnecessary for Mecole Hardman to say these sort of things about the Jets, because they traded him back to a team that he wanted to go to. That wasn't a requirement. They didn't have to trade him back to the Chiefs or have to be treating him in a right way where they give him back to the Chiefs and think that that's fine. They could have traded him away to any team and, you know, kind of screwed him in a bit by not having him benefit. But they were decent enough to trade him back to a team he was familiar with. He goes on to win the Super Bowl. And now you have a chance to analyze both things. And could there be some truth to both sides? I think that's kind of where the final verdict is that I've fallen on, because I don't think Mecole Hardman is wrong in saying that, you know, this was all Aaron Rodgers' show, and whatever the plan fell out, and whenever this team didn't really know what to make of its situation or what to do, it didn't matter because Aaron Rodgers was there to kind of bail everybody out of it. I think that is true, and I think it was painted like that a lot last season with the narrative around the Jets. Just because Aaron Rodgers went there, everyone thought this team was ready to win a Super Bowl. This team was ready to make that huge next step, and then, you know, that wasn't the case at all. They weren't anywhere close. There were some stories that broke out that Aaron Rodgers really wasn't happy with the offensive line. The offensive line was going to be a real problem, and it turned out to be that. You know, just in preseason, it didn't look right. In training camp, it didn't look right with all the reports that came out. Then Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, and if my memory serves me right, I think he was rolling out trying to avoid pressure when he ruptured his Achilles. That obviously comes from not enough time, having to create more time. And, I think from that aspect, Sauce Gardner or not, Mecole Hardman's comments made sense because that is true. They just relied a lot on Aaron Rodgers to bail them out, and that proved to be their detriment because he got hurt, and then they didn't really have a game plan to implement once Aaron Rodgers wasn't there. I think everybody hyped it up a little bit too much last year with Aaron Rodgers. The quarterback is, you could argue, the hardest position in a lot of sports compared to other sports, but football is the ultimate team sport, so you need to have everything else be really good to even be able to compete with all the other good teams. I think the Jets failed to do that. But also looking at it from Sauce's point of view, at the same time, yes, I agree that it was unnecessary, and he kind of let us in on what kind of happened in team meetings when special teams coordinators weren't happy with Mecole Hardman. He was really not performing when he said he was dropping punts and such things like that, kind of letting us in on, Mecole Hardman wasn't holding his end of the deal also, so why should he feel like he should start regardless of him being in successful situations before? That part of it I do agree with. I think him saying he didn't earn his stripes is a good, valid point, just based on what he's saying, if it is true. So both of them make good points. And at the end of the day, with this whole situation, it makes, I think, the Jets almost look worse than either of these guys because it just looks dysfunctional is what I'm really trying to get at. It looks like the Jets were painted as this team that was ready to perform, ready to compete for the division in playoffs and things like that, but they couldn't be further from that, at least last season, just based on this argument going on from former teammates, the arguments behind the scenes. And I know a lot of teams have arguments and disagreements when they're in a season and things get heated and things aren't going your way. But when the way this has extended and the way this has just carried on, I think it says more about the Jets and how they really weren't ready at all last year just because they got Aaron Rodgers to compete whatsoever compared to other organizations that keep their, as they say, dirty laundry in-house. They don't air their dirty laundry. I think that's the way that good organizations, balanced organizations, successful organizations go about their business. And whenever you see stories like this, to me it says more about the team than the individuals and how they feel. That's just how I see it. And at the end of the day, too, now you head into this year, they're trying to get past that situation of what Mecole Hardman say, and the Jets are trying to move past that and kind of disprove that. They have addressed it a little bit with trading for the Ravens offensive tackle Morgan Moses, trying to help him out in that way. Aaron Rodgers is going to come back. I don't think he's going to take the spot as the vice president. I know there's been stories about that. If that happens, then I don't know. No, I don't think anybody really knows anything about football if that happens. But I don't believe those rumors. He's going to be there, and I think now this year it's going to be we're going to get a real taste of what it could be with Aaron Rodgers, because last year I think they just overblew it a little bit too much. Now this year they learned from their lessons in last year with how bad they performed, no real game plan to implement regardless if Aaron Rodgers was there. Now hopefully they've learned that lesson, and we're going to get a good evaluation of where they are now after all these little issues that really don't mean much other than what you put out there on the field. So it was interesting to see Sauce respond to it and go a little bit further by airing out some of the stuff that happened behind closed doors. But, regardless, everyone's going to move past it. We're going to move past it in this show. It was just something interesting that I saw that he brought it up. But moving on with the show, I'm going to send it to our first break right now. And after the break, we're going to dive into some of the rule change proposals that some of the NFL teams proposed recently, just in the offseason before their annual league meeting later this month in March. And I'm going to get into all that. I picked out some of the best ones that I found the most interesting, as well as the story on Calvin Ridley signing with the Titans and the story on Dak Prescott's brother. praising the Eagles front office. So find out more about all that stuff after the break on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast with the next story on deck for us. The rule changes that were proposed recently in the offseason, now with the start of the new league year officially yesterday. Everyone saw the deals that were made official, all the trades, the free agent signings that moved past the tampering phase. Now everything's technically official, all the releases, the trades, and all that stuff that I mentioned. There was also talks about some rule changes, some proposals from certain teams to make changes to certain rules. The ones that popped up the most were onside kicks, challenges, the trade deadlines, all those things. I thought some of those were most interesting from a handful of teams that I was going to bring up on this show. And some of the more significant ones in the mind of the NFL offices and the ones that were deemed more significant and critical, those were going to be addressed by proposals from the competition committee later on, I'm assuming. So the ones that I'm going to present right now are ones that are considered a bit more, minor, a bit looser to talk about from all the other teams to just suggest and give their 2 cents on it. Whereas the drop hip tackle could be more of a critical one. That'll be addressed by the competition committee as an example. So, and before I go into these rules, I will say if any of these rules do make it into a decision-making process, it needs to be approved by 24 out of the 32 owners to be actually passed as it being an official rule. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into some of them. The first one that was brought up a lot and that was pretty specific was the one change proposed by the Eagles. It said that, or they wanted a change to the onside kick because of, if you're being honest, I don't think anybody watching this show, or definitely I couldn't remember the last time an onside kick was recovered by the kicking team. It always is the last gasp chance to try and get the ball back, but the percentage of recovering it is so low that, if you do see it in a game, you're almost 90% of the time, 95% of the time, nobody believes it's going to happen, or people might think it could happen, but it's not really executed right. It has to be so perfect, and it has to bounce so perfectly that the other team just doesn't recover it cleanly, and then you get only a chance to tie the game, win the game if you do get it. So that doesn't really work, or it hasn't worked, at least in my opinion. So the Eagles proposed that instead of an onside kick, the traditional one, that they would permit a team that's trying to tie the game, win the game, to maintain possession after they score a touchdown or a field goal. And if it converts a 4th and 20 offensive play from their own 20, then they get a chance to either continue that drive and just keep going, basically. And that is obviously instead of doing the regular onside kick. And just to throw out a fact out there about the statistics around the onside kick. Just last year, only 2 out of 41 attempted onside kicks were recovered. So, very low number, like I mentioned. Low probability that anyone is going to continue that excitement, which I think is the biggest part, because you want to, with the NFL, with these close games, it almost feels like you don't want it to end. You want it to keep going. You want to see all the twists and turns and all the emotion to keep going. With the onside kick, it almost ruins it because, they're about to kick an onside kick. Let's see if they get it. But nobody ever really executes it right, or something goes wrong. Somebody touches it early, or the kick's just not good at all. So they want to make a change to it. And this proposal by the Eagles, I think, is very interesting. It's definitely very different than what I've seen before with any onside kick. And I think I like the idea, but it might be a bit too different for the NFL. Because, converting a 4th and 20 from your own 20, I see what they're trying to do there and make it still low odds to convert it. You still have to execute it almost as perfect as an onside kick. Realistically, converting a 4th and 20 is almost impossible. Makes it very easy for the defense, but with it being a 4th and 20 from their own 20, I think it's an idea that you can throw out there and have people consider it, because it doesn't favor the offense too much. Everyone knows that, follows the NFL, that's the way the league is going. And I think this is still very low odds that if you do add it in there, it adds a little bit more excitement. But on the contrary, the bad part about this is it could add more stoppages to the game and more decision making that's very subjective a lot. Because say you go for the 4th and 20, you have a chance to continue that drive, you throw it deep down the field, and there's a possible pass interference, illegal touching, offensive pass interference or something like that. You have to stop the game even further. It's already at the end, but now you're elongating it a lot more because the refs have to go to the replay booth. Do you allow the team that's going for it to have a challenge at that situation? Because it's such a rare opportunity, do you allow another challenge, or does everything have to be from the replay booth? And if it does, teams are going to be mad if the replay booth doesn't try to review it. There's going to be more scrutiny, more heat on the officials to make the right call, especially on a 4th and 20. Some people think it's an obvious call. Some people might not like their decision. So from that part, I think that's something the NFL doesn't really want to do. And this is almost too wild of an idea from the Eagles. It's an exciting one if you think about all the positives, but I think it's too much for the officials to get it right. A potential for penalties and all that stuff to go wrong. There's more wrong than there is right in this idea, but I do like them trying to change the onside kick to something different. I think that has to change because nobody really has a chance with it anymore, and you kind of know how games are going to end once someone lines up in the onside kick formation anyway. So to add more excitement, they need to change it, but this one might have gone a little bit too far past the line of reason for the NFL. But moving on to the next one, it was a proposal from the Colts, and this one's a bit more simple, a bit more reasonable. It was that they would allow the coaches to challenge any foul that's been called on the field, subjective ones too, a pass interference, stuff like that. I know the NFL only allows you to challenge certain rules, and other ones, you can't challenge, or I think the NBA as well. There's some things that, if the ref calls it one way, if they call a foul, and you can challenge that foul call, but if they might have called something else, you can't challenge them to look at something that they didn't call per se. So in the NFL, if you think a guy might have had pass interference and you challenge the call of pass interference, I don't think you can challenge, once you look at the replay, you can't be like, he was actually holding. They're looking at pass interference. illegal touching or something like that. If you see it on the board and you realize, oh, it wasn't actually this that I'm challenging, it's something else that is now more clear because of replay, I don't think you can do that. The Colts saying they want to challenge everything, I think it should be like that anyway, that you should be able to challenge all the calls already. But again, it falls onto this, you get into this gray area, this delicate area where if you want to challenge subjective calls as well, you can't really get into who's right or wrong because it's subjective. So you could look at it one way, another person could really be all in on, you're wrong, it's this way actually. The subjective ones, is there really a right answer to a subjective call on that day? A lot of calls are how the referee views it, so you have to put your trust in the ref to make the right call or what he believes is the right call. I know there's rules and language that classifies what is and what isn't a foul, but at the end of the day, the ref might see it one way and they'll call it that way. So I think adding on that you should be able to challenge all the subjective ones as well. Again, just like the Eagles one, I think it creates too much more added pressure on the refs to make a good call, or what is deemed a good call. And it'll just add more confusion, more criticism, more bad light on the NFL for having refs that are blind or can't really make the right call. I don't think that's something that the league really wants to entertain. There's more wrong than there is right with that. It's a decent idea, but I think they'll just have trouble deciding the language, the kind of words to use to really decide what should be challenged and what shouldn't be a foul. They already have trouble doing that as it stands right now. I think this just opens it up to a wider range of classifications, generalizations with rules and stuff like that. So again, it's good in principle, but thinking about it more and more, there might be more wrongs than right with this Colts proposal. Another one by the Detroit Lions was that they would allow the coaches to get a third challenge if one of their first two are successful rather than if both are. Currently, I think it could be one or two. I'm blanking on that. I'm just having a clouded thought right now about if they get one challenge. I'm pretty sure they just get one challenge. And if they get it right, they get another one because they got it right. So in saying that, with the Lions and proposing that, I think 3 might be too much. I think you could get 2, and then if you get one or the other one right, I think that should be and would be more fair for the NFL and the way things are called that way. Making it 3, I think might be a bit too much just because it adds more stoppages, more reviews, and a lot of fans already complain about that enough. The NFL game is usually around 3.5, 4 hours anyway. I think it just could make it a lot longer, even if, there's a lot of wrong calls. It's another one where, you might be asking for too much at that point to get 3 challenges if one of the first 2 are right, because you're going to see a lot of coaches really trying to abuse that and really push it for one of them to be right. And I think for a ref to say a coach is wrong 3 times on a challenge, it'll add just too much more argument, dispute, too much extra stuff that just takes away from the game already than it already does. So another good idea, but I just think it's a bit too far out there. The last one I wanted to talk about was proposed by the Steelers, and they were the only team to propose that the trade deadline be moved only 1 week back. There were 6 other teams, the Eagles, the Browns, and the 49ers among the 3 others that said it should be moved back to week 10. And I actually said this before when this was more of a talking point, when I had it as a segment on a show. I think week 9 is more reasonable. A lot of times with these rule changes, I think the league just declines them, to be quite honest, because they'll always find something wrong with it. I think only pushing it back 1 week, they'll see it as, all right, they're trying to make a a compromise there. Everyone or the majority want to be pushed back 2 weeks. I think the league will not like that too much, won't be open to accepting that. By the Steelers proposing it to be moved back 1 week, it's a bit of give and take. They don't want to be too extreme with it, and the league really isn't changing too much. 1 week is a lot for these players and these front offices, quite honestly, when they're trying to make a trade or they're trying to evaluate something. Even having those extra 7 days, I think, will make a difference, rather than having 2 more weeks. And then the topic around tanking becomes the main issue, or just teams really not trying to win and stuff like that, trading away all their players because they don't see that they have a chance to move on to the playoffs. With 1 week extra pushing the trade deadline back, I don't think it makes much of a difference. So, in all honesty, I think this one's the most likely to happen trade deadline change. I thought that was the one that's more likely to happen anyway. But week 9 seems like the more reasonable one to me. The one I liked the most was the Eagles one. But I think it is, from a fan perspective, I think it's great. But from executive office position, I think they'll find something wrong with it and won't try to alter it too much. And then by that point, is it really a change? So I think the Steelers are the ones to most likely get it done. But we'll see where those changes end up. There's going to be, I'm sure, a lot more proposals from other teams, but those are the ones that I found to be the ones most interesting and the ones that I would like to see happen more often than not. A pushback on the trade deadline, and the onside kick has to be the one, for me, that has to change in some aspect. But moving on now with the show, I will send it to another quick break, and on the other side of it, I'll have the story on Dak Prescott's brother and what he said in regards to the Eagles front office and what the signing of Calvin Ridley means for the Tennessee Titans and their new offense that they're trying to build under their new head coach, Brian Callahan. It's all exciting for the Tennessee Titans, so you don't want to miss that. That's all coming up right after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Diving into the third segment on Calvin Ridley, the new Tennessee Titan. This deal happened just yesterday. The Tennessee Titans needed another playmaker on top of DeAndre Hopkins. They have a new young quarterback in Will Levis. They just signed Tony Pollard. They just needed a bit more excitement, a bit more playmaking to add on the outside with Hopkins, and they got it in Calvin Ridley. Probably the best free agent left at that point in the market, along with Arik Armstead and other players, Devin White, Jerome Baker, of those caliber kind of guys that could make an instant impact. The only thing that was surprising more than the news itself was the kind of contract that he got. 4 years, $92 million, $50 million guaranteed. And I think that caught a lot more people by surprise than the Titans making a move for another playmaker. They were in talks with a lot of wide receivers to add more firepower to their offense. But it was surprising because, like I mentioned, the money, but also because everyone that talked about this situation with Calvin Ridley and all the reports that I read were of the mindset that Calvin Ridley and the Jaguars were holding off on this deal because they were essentially doing the Jaguars a favor, or the Jaguars were trying to do what's best for them by waiting until the new league year started yesterday in order to prevent the Jaguars from owing the Atlanta Falcons a second-round pick if they got a deal done before the new league year started, and coughing up that second-round pick to the Atlanta Falcons for the terms that were agreed that sent Calvin Ridley from the Falcons to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That was the original idea. That's what everybody had in mind. But once the new league year did start, the deal didn't really happen right away, and people were actually thinking that Calvin Ridley was testing the market out in all reality after the new league year started, instead of looking out for the Jaguars and re-signing with them, as everybody thought. He was potentially testing out all the other offers from other teams, waiting for these other offers to come in right away to potentially sway him. And it was reported that the Patriots were interested, as well as other teams, I'm sure. But once you get a contract offer like that from the Titans, I think, Calvin Ridley, like a lot of players should do, I think he didn't think twice about it, looking out for his best interest at 29 years old. How much better of a deal are you going to get than 4 years, $92 million? It was mind-boggling to me that they offered that much to him at 29 years old. But again, all kudos to him for making that kind of money. It's great for him as a player, and now he joins the Titans team that is looking pretty exciting, I think, in all terms, just because you have Hopkins, Ridley now. I think Tony Pollard could be exciting. On top of Will Levis also being an exciting young quarterback from some of the games that I watched last year. So the Titans are kind of moving in a different direction. The reports on the story on Calvin Ridley, it said that the constant word that was being popped up was modernize their offense, modernize this team. Because with Mike Vrabel, I think you saw it kind of take a step back in the other direction, trying to be powerful, run the ball every time with Derrick Henry, have these maulers as offensive linemen, and have wide receivers that could block. You throw in a play action here or there, and you keep it simple, you keep it in your face, intimidating kind of offense. And now you have a new guy coming in here in Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals, their old offensive coordinator. Now he gets to run his own team, his own offense. I'm sure he's going to be involved with it and modernizing the team, modernizing the philosophy of the team, the organization was a constant that he always brought up. And in his introductory press conference, he said, "The teams that win the most games are generally the teams that pass the ball the best." And just that thought alone, you look back at the Tennessee Titans last year, they ranked 5th to last in receiving yards on passes thrown outside the numbers. You only have DeAndre Hopkins to throw to, basically, with a young quarterback, looking for Hopkins, looking for his most reliable option. Those passes aren't always going to be on target. He's still learning and developing, and quite frankly, once teams double team Hop, it gets very dicey for a young quarterback. I was impressed with Will Levis in some of the games that he did play and played very well. Some games that he was in, close games with other teams. He had a big win against the Miami Dolphins in Miami, if my memory serves me right. So those kind of games, there's excitement there. I liked what I saw from Will Levis, and now adding Calvin Ridley to this equation makes it very exciting. And going back to Calvin Ridley for a few seconds on his contract, he's now the 5th highest paid wide receiver with $23 million per year, making more than the likes of Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, Debo, Mike Evans now on his new deal, more than his new teammate DeAndre Hopkins. And he's paid $1 million less than Stephon Diggs, and people are more aware of what kind of contract he holds, how big it is. So Calvin Ridley is now in that space, and it leads to the first kind of question that pops up in people's heads once a deal like this is made is, was it worth it to get Calvin Ridley for this amount? You couldn't find a cheaper option, maybe a Darnell Mooney from the Chicago Bears before the Atlanta Falcons scooped him up. Wouldn't he have been maybe not the same level of production as Calvin Ridley, because I still believe Calvin Ridley is a low tier, middle tier wide receiver one. He might not give you the production that a Calvin Ridley would have, but he definitely would have been cheaper for them to maybe explore other aspects of this team. To that, I would say I think Calvin Ridley definitely could have come at a cheaper cost. Did the Titans jump on it maybe too early and were too eager? Maybe, but at the same time, you want to make sure you get Calvin Ridley. Like I mentioned before, he was the best free agent available. So if you have a chance to get him, you want to make sure, you go and get him. You make sure he signs. Once he sees that deal, he forgets about everything else and he signs. So you do understand it a little bit, but with more reasoning, with making such an important deal like this, I think I maybe wouldn't have done it. If it meant not paying 4 years for $92 million, then I probably would have moved on to somebody else. But now that it is done, I think there are definitely some positives, like the production you're going to get from him. He was very good for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like I mentioned, he's coming off 2 back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And just the kind of journey that he's gone on with the gambling stuff and everything like that, you think he'd lose a step, but last year he proved, I think, a lot of people wrong. He looked like he really hasn't missed a step at all, and he was a good target for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And one thing to point out, just on the idea of the Titans modernizing this offense a bit more, trying to change it to be more exciting with Brian Callahan coming in, I think if he would have came in with Mike Vrabel still here, I think it would have been more of a loss for the Titans than it is with Brian Callahan. I think he suits this team more now that they're trying to change their identity. It seems to me like they've gone with a bit more finesse, a bit more skill set and ability, rather than physical, run-heavy, powerful players on their team like they tried to do with Mike Vrabel and what kind of offense he wanted to run. It was successful, don't get me wrong, with their couple years that they were around the playoffs and in good playoff games. But now, towards the end of his tenure, you kind of saw that, it was a bit overdone. It wasn't really getting anywhere new. They were always just in low-scoring, tight games. And one, they weren't winning them. And another thing is that it's not exciting, so people are just going to criticize it anyway because they're not really liking what they're seeing. So it's always going to have a negative connotation to it. With Brian Callahan, he's coming from a spread, exciting, down-the-field offense with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, Joe Burrow, throwing it a lot of the time in these games. They might not have that skill set yet. Definitely not, I should say, with Will Levis comparing him to Joe Burrow. You have good receivers now, but I think you have to build it up a little bit more. I like Tony Pollard in this type of offense. I think they're going to use his pass-catching ability a bit more, and that sort of idea of them being more finesse, more modern in it, I like it. And it brings me to my next question that you could think of is, where does this put them now in the hierarchy of the AFC South? I think the Texans are the best team in that division. The Jaguars have made some good, impressive moves. They actually just signed Arik Armstead to their defensive line. I think it was 3 years, $51 million or $31 million, something like that, before I came on the air to do this show. So they're also rebuilding a lot. They got Darnell Savage from the Green Bay Packers as well. So they've made some good moves. They've got some good pieces, but I think just right now, I might be riding the Titans' coattails a bit too much right now, but I think the Titans have just jumped them just a little bit because they not only made their team better with Calvin Ridley, they made the other team worse with Jacksonville because now they don't have a number one receiver. They signed Gabe Davis, but we haven't seen him be the only receiver on a team that has constantly put out great performances. That's still a question there. If Gabe Davis would have been there with Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, I would have said that the Jaguars are going to challenge the Houston Texans a lot more. But because he jumped over to a rival team in the Titans, I think it'll be a closer battle between the Tennessee Titans and the Jacksonville Jaguars for that second spot than it will be with the Texans for that first spot, if that makes sense, I think the Texans, I love the signing of Joe Mixon, or the trade with Joe Mixon, Daniel Hunter coming over, Azeez Al-Shaair also coming over from the Titans to the Houston Texans, so that's massive as well. Plus the development of Will Anderson. Christian Harris was a good underrated player that I love. I think he broke out in the playoffs a bit more. And then it goes without saying, C.J. Stroud, Tank Dell looked like an absolute stud. Nico Collins establishing himself more as a number one receiver. I think they're a tier above the other teams. And the Titans, I like what they're doing. But the Jaguars, I also like what they're doing. And I think it'll be closer between those two guys. And in all reality, the Colts are kind of being the ones left back. I think they need to make an exciting move like this. We still have to see what Anthony Richardson looks like, but they're kind of being left behind a little bit. So overall, I love this for the whole AFC North or AFC South, I should say, because before when I looked at them, the games weren't really that great. You kind of knew what team was better than the rest. Last year it was the Jaguars to start the season, and then it was more exciting because the Texans grew into that. They were exciting as well. Now you have the Tennessee Titans not only adding good pieces, but trying to change the identity of them. And everybody wants to see more points now in the NFL. All the offense is getting the love now. They're trying to switch more into that sort of team. And I think the fans are going to love it. It's going to bring excitement to the city of Tennessee, or the team of the Tennessee Titans, and all that just wrapped into this whole division. I think it's going to be great for the whole AFC North. The AFC just keeps getting better, more competitive, more exciting with all these additions and trades within the conference. I'm looking forward to watching the Titans now more than ever. I can confidently say that, and I think it's going to be great for that division, for the whole AFC. And next season is just going to be all in all really positive, I think, with all these changes. I keep saying it more. It seems like this offseason has been more crazy with more blockbuster moves than I could remember in any other offseason. As a fan, I love it, and I'm excited to watch it. I wanted to start right away, but we're obviously a lot of months removed from the start of the season. But that's where I'll leave the conversation. I'm going to send it to the final break of the show, and on the other side of it, I'm going to bring you all the comments from Dak Prescott's brother, what he said about the Eagles, and how that makes Dak look, and how it all ties into the all-in comments made by Jerry Jones back a few months ago, or a month ago, at the Senior Bowl. So stick around. You're not going to want to miss and be part of that conversation on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Back here on the show for the last time of today's live show, diving into the last segment on the Dallas Cowboys and what did Dak Prescott's brother say about the Eagles front office, praising them. Comes at a little bit of a surprise for a lot of people. But before I get into that and what he said exactly, one last time I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below with any questions, comments, or anything you want to say on the live show. If you want to do that, use the link at gsmcpodcast.net. If you can't see it and are listening to this show, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. It makes sure your questions pop up right away here to my right, one by one on a list, and I could read them out and maybe take this conversation somewhere else, bring a different perspective to me, and we can talk about it. It's a lot more fun that way, I believe. It's a huge help for the whole network and this show. So we always thank you guys tremendously when you guys are able to do that. But going back to Dak Prescott's brother, what did he say on Twitter a few days ago? I think it was Monday now, when he posted something on X on the Eagles front office. Obviously, the day that they signed Saquon Barkley, they brought in Bryce Huff on their defensive line. Then later on, they brought back their old safety, CJ Gardner-Johnson. The Eagles unquestionably have been very active with their transactions on top of, or as well as the Washington Commanders just in that division. And Dak Prescott's brother, Tad Prescott, went on X after that blockbuster move, sending Saquon to the Eagles, and he said, "So, if it wasn't clear already, it is now. The Eagles have the best front office in the NFL with a hashtag, how about them Cowboys?" This all leads into a bigger topic that I want to get into with the Cowboys. But before, that post on Twitter leads it in very nicely, I think, because, people will look at it and be thinking, oh, how does this make Dak look with the team now? You have his brother now chirping and chiming in with his opinion, adding a bunch of other extra stuff to the Cowboys offseason news. Dak Prescott needs a new contract. His brother is now saying this sort of stuff. So are the Cowboys going to be more annoyed with Dak? But I think this all leads into the idea that the Cowboys and Jerry Jones started this whole offseason, and it really has turned into the just the reliable story narrative to fall back on and go back to and just think about throughout this whole offseason, probably heading into next season. When Jerry Jones said that the Cowboys were all in on this season, once somebody says all in my opinion, you can only take that as one way in regards to an NFL team. When you say you're all in, you're going to try and go win the Super Bowl now for real. I know the Cowboys always think that, but Jerry Jones hasn't ever really said, we're going all in on this season. When you say that, how could it mean anything else? That's just my perspective. But then he kind of took a step back and said that, your definition of all in could be different than my definition of all in. Already making a little bit of an excuse there, but, it is right in some aspect or another. Jerry Jones is right. He could have meant something else differently. We don't know. But a lot of people don't really need to know what you mean when you say all in. I think that's pretty clear when you say something like that. And, Tad Prescott chimes in when the Cowboys are just sitting back. They were the last team to make a signing or any sort of move in free agency. And that, on top of their division rivals, the Commanders, making the most moves out of anybody in that division. Then you have the Eagles not falling way behind them. And you even have the Giants as well, who a lot of people might think as the worst team in that division. But they brought in Brian Burns. They traded away Xavier McKinney and Saquon, but they brought in Brian Burns, John Runyon to rebuild their offensive line as well. A replacement in Devin Singletary for Saquon Barkley. He was brought in. So they have made some moves. They're also being active in the free agency market because they obviously need it to add more talent after losing two of their best players. So they're at least trying to do something about it. The Commanders haven't been great, but they're trying to do something about it with Dan Quinn, who the Cowboys are very familiar with, going to Washington from the Dallas Cowboys, and their new general manager, Adam Peters. They're not sitting back and waiting on what everybody else is going to do. They're being proactive and going out there to try and make their team better. Then you have the Eagles, as well as always, Howie Roseman, always one of the more active GMs in this whole process. He was out there, brought in Saquon, Bryce Huff, brought back CJ Gardner-Johnson. They're making moves as well. And the Cowboys, yeah, they have a great roster, but they're still sitting back and everyone's looking around just like, are you going to do something? Are you going to try and make this team better? Because it might look like they have star power, but if you look at other positions, they still need interior defensive linemen to stop the run. They got run all over by the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones had probably one of his best games in recent memory on the Cowboys because he just couldn't stop the run. They need another defensive back. If they're not going to re-sign Stephon Gilmore, you only have Trayvon Diggs coming off of an ACL injury, so you need at least another defensive back there to kind of supplement that. They need another wide receiver because there's been talks about Michael Gallup given permission to seek a trade. So if you lose him, who else do you really have on top of CeeDee Lamb? Already Michael Gallup wasn't looked at as a tremendous number 2 wide receiver, so if you lose him, how is that wide receiver room going to look? And obviously you lose Tony Pollard, so you need a running back to replace him. From talking to Cowboys fans and just seeing their reactions, I don't think Deuce Vaughn is the top candidate to be that replacement or the fan favorite to be that replacement, so they have to do something there. And they just lost on their O-line. Tyron Smith at their left tackle. One of their centers, Tyler Biadasz, he went to the Washington Commanders. So again, and Connor Williams is a free agent right now as well. So you need to do something on that offensive line to protect Dak Prescott if you're going to try and re-sign him. So it's not like they have nothing to do. They actually have a lot to do. And they finally actually did something the other day. They signed Eric Kendricks from the Los Angeles Chargers when it looked like he was going to sign with the 49ers. He goes back on that and signs with the Cowboys. So that's something that I think that was positive for them. Eric Kendricks might not be the blockbuster move that they wanted to make, but it is at least something. There are still good players out there like Devin White and Jerome Baker, among other players that they could use. It could be a little bit more expensive now with them trying to get somebody else in the door, because Devin White, I'm sure, is going to command a lot of money. Jerome Baker as well. He couldn't restructure his deal with the Dolphins, so how easy is it going to be for him to fit in the Dallas Cowboys financial plans if they still owe money to Dak potentially and re-sign him? They have Micah's extension coming down the road, CeeDee Lamb's extension coming down the road. They're not really so free spending as a lot of people might want to think. And now you look at how I started this whole segment with the comments from Dak Prescott. It might look a bit outlandish and a bit, just unnecessary for Dak's brother to say that, but in a way, could he be right? Pointing something out like this, a lot of people love to talk about the Cowboys and, say what's wrong with them and stuff like that, what they're doing wrong. A lot of times, we've seen a lot of Cowboys players say what they think the team should do, how they should fix it. Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence as well, being the two that come to mind most recently that said something. And Dak Prescott as well, talking about the culture and what he sees it being right now. He thinks it's great, but his brother thinks otherwise, and he goes out there and praises another team for them actually doing something. And I don't think, quite honestly, it's a big deal, one. But on the other hand, if people want to make it a big deal and talk about it, I don't think he's really wrong in the sense that the Cowboys haven't done anything to prove Jerry Jones right in being all in. And unfortunately for Jerry Jones, because he said something like that, it's not going to disappear anytime soon because of what he said, being all in, and because they're the Dallas Cowboys. Everyone loves to talk about them. Everyone finds any excuse to talk badly about them, criticize them in some way. They're always going to have to work extra hard for people to praise them outside of their fan base. So when you say you're going all in and you don't do anything in the offseason right now to try and improve and back up those comments, and instead you're making excuses for yourself and saying, it might not have meant what you thought it meant, it makes you have that same feeling about the Cowboys, here we go again. They're saying one thing, they were painted as something initially, and now, it's the same old Cowboys. They're not going to really do anything. They're not trying to improve. They're just trying to get by because they have a good team to win good amount of regular season games, but it's the same old story with the Cowboys. People are going to think they're just going to get to playing a really good team, Their team's not going to be improved. It's going to be the same as it always has been, and they're going to lose. It's going to be the same story. Already from the start of free agency, it's looking like that. And is it fair? Probably not. But you kind of have to lay in the bed that you make when you say, this season it's different. We're going to go all in. We're going to try. He didn't say, to be fair, that they're going to try and win a Super Bowl. We're going to try and go all the way. So I will give him that. But saying you're all in means you're all in. I don't know, deciding what they want to do, what is best for them. They've missed out on some big fish already in all the running backs that went away that really went at a low price, $8 million for a few of them annually. So they missed out on some of those guys, and I just don't think they have much more time to lose for them to really make a difference and validate those comments that Jerry Jones made. That's where I stand on it. Again, with these last topics, I would love to know what you guys think about it. Where do you guys stand on Tad Prescott's comments and how you felt about them initially reading them? How you feel now about the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones saying all in? I want to know it all, so if you would, leave a comment or comment on the live show. I would always encourage that. I love knowing what you guys think on that topic, but in saying that, that is going to wrap it up for me on this show and on that last topic. As always, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show's content specifically, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel on YouTube and or the Podcast Network channel on YouTube as well for YouTube shorts that come out every day, individual segment videos that you can go back and watch if you missed one segment, or just rewatch one segment if you really liked it and might have missed it, as well as entire live shows that are recorded and are also on each of those channels as well. And again, remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. Again, thanking you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.